Before every start, he would freeze for a moment. His right hand would touch his chest, a short, almost invisible gesture, always in the same rhythm. Behind the wheel, this man became someone journalists and rivals would unanimously call almost otherworldly. But an hour after the finish, the same man could snap at his own engineer so hard that the entire garage went silent. He spent years in court fighting for the rights to his own name. He demanded that the federation rewrite the rules to suit him, and when they finally did, his own team was the one that lost the most from it. One man, two entirely different personalities inside him. My name is Illia, you're watching Shifted, and today, we'll try to understand how they could even coexist inside a single body. The man who could enter a state no one else at a steering wheel could reach, and the man who consciously drove into another car for revenge. We'll see the last 3 days, when he still didn't allow himself to stop, and we'll live through an incredible era, from the grenade engines that blew up before they could reach the finish, to the naturally aspirated scream that would later be called the greatest sound in the history of this sport, and all the way to the season when the last electronic safety net disappeared from the cars. Senna could never fully understand what actually happened to him that day. He's already on pole, but he doesn't stop. Lap after lap, he keeps going faster, as if something inside him had decided to test where the human limit actually is. Half a second, a full second, 1.5. That's the gap to his teammate sitting in an identical car with the same engineering package, on the same tires. Later, he would try to explain it in words and never fully succeed. He would say that at some point, he stopped consciously driving the car, that his body and the metal merged into a single mechanism, functioning in a state impossible to describe in words fit for an interview, that it was somewhere far beyond anything he could even understand about himself. Behind the wheel of that car, there was no fear. There was only a speed curve going up without any visible ceiling. The next day, the race, the same otherworldly pace and a gap of nearly a full minute over the rest of the field. Then, a mistake, 10 laps from the finish, and the corner at Portier. The man who yesterday had touched something beyond the edge of consciousness, today could not handle his own anger at himself. He didn't return to the pits. He walked out of the wrecked car on the live track and went on foot to his apartment, a few hundred meters from the paddock. The team waited for him all evening, and they never saw him. This was the first side of his nature, a man capable of a state almost no one in the history of this sport could reach, and at the same time, a man who vanished for an entire evening over an ordinary human mistake. But how did Senna even learn to cross that limit? The answer lies in the era that forged his style. Picture Formula One in the early 80s. Engines of 1.5 liters, smaller in displacement than a modern family hatchback. Thanks to massive turbochargers, they were pushing over 1,000 horsepower in qualifying mode. They had catastrophic turbo lag. The driver hits the throttle, nothing happens for a second, and then the engine delivers an explosive punch of power that instantly tries to throw the car into a spin. These engines rarely survived more than a few consecutive laps at race pace. In the paddock, they were called exactly what they were: grenades. A young Senna is sitting in a car that has every reason to lose. Toleman, a team with a tiny budget. Their chassis is heavy, built more on enthusiasm than on thousands of hours in a wind tunnel. But that day, a downpour turns the track into a solid mirror. In the rain, the power of the grenades becomes not an advantage, but a verdict. With no electronic safety net, any sudden spike in boost pressure instantly breaks the car loose into a spin. In these conditions, aerodynamics doesn't win. While the recognized world leaders were literally just surviving on track, Senna turned this chaos into his advantage. His right foot could feel the micro moments of losing grip, lifting off the throttle a fraction of a second before the car would fly into the wall. He was finding grip where it didn't exist for anyone else. Thanks to this millimeter-level control, he easily passes two-time world champion Niki Lauda. He starts hunting the race leader Alain Prost, gaining an incredible 3 seconds per lap. The gap is melting away, watched by millions of viewers. And exactly at this moment, on lap 31, the red flags come out. The stewards decide to stop the race. Senna is denied the overtake that was, mathematically, already inevitable. He finishes second. He didn't take the trophy that day, but the official result no longer mattered. The whole world had seen something bigger. He had proven that he could tame even this kind of chaos. This was a brutal environment where the smallest mistake meant flying into a wall, but it was these wild, unpredictable machines that taught him to feel the car as an extension of his own body, and it was this stolen victory that laid the foundation for the otherworldly style that would conquer all of Formula One a few years later. 4 years later, this style, forged in the rain, finally got a car worthy of it, and met a rival worthy of it. Before the start of the 1988 season, Alain Prost took the new car out for a few test laps at Imola, returned to the pits, and told management, "This car will win the World Championship." He wasn't wrong. The final season of the turbo era, the new McLaren MP44 was designed around the concept of an ultra-low chassis. In pursuit of perfect aerodynamics, ground clearance was reduced so drastically that drivers were forced to lie almost flat inside the cockpit. New regulations tried to strangle the turbo engines. Boost pressure was capped. Fuel tanks cut down to 150 liters. A year earlier, the same Honda engine had been producing over 1,000 horsepower. After these restrictions, just over 650. And even in this restricted form, the Honda V6 still outclassed its naturally aspirated rivals. Across the season, this car won 15 races out of 16 possible, a record that would stand for decades. But technological dominance changed the rules of the game. When external competition disappeared, the only rival for a McLaren driver was the other McLaren driver. Senna and Prost closed themselves off from each other. Normal competition on track turned into paranoia in the garage. They stopped sharing telemetry data. They waited until the last second before rolling out of the garage to change the rear wing angle, just so the other's mechanics wouldn't have time to copy it. On track, they squeezed each other off the asphalt at speeds where a mistake threatened both of them. It was in this car, under the pressure of this internal war, that Senna would deliver a Monaco qualifying lap almost 1.5 seconds faster than Prost. The pressure reached the point where the drivers started making mistakes. Round 12 of the season, Monza. Prost had already retired with an engine failure. Senna was leading comfortably, only needing to bring the car home. Instead, he held an aggressive pace and tried to lap Jean-Louis Schlesser, a driver who posed no threat to him at all in that race. Contact. Senna breaks the suspension and retires. It was the only race of the season McLaren lost, not because of rivals, but because of an internal pressure that pushed the drivers into unnecessary risks. Senna would take his first title at the end of that season, but the real lesson was something else. For the first time in his career, he understood the most dangerous rival is not a driver from another team. It's the person sitting at the next monitor, watching all your secrets on telemetry graphs. Sometimes, a world championship is decided not by an engine. The naturally aspirated Honda V10 is spinning right up to 13,000 revolutions per minute. Without a turbo damping the exhaust, it produces a mechanical resonance that would later be considered the benchmark of that era. But on this day, the finale isn't decided by the engineering. The internal war at McLaren has reached its climax. Senna needs to win. Prost would be satisfied even with a mutual retirement. At the chicane before the final corner, Senna attacks on the inside. Prost closes the door, as if his rival isn't there at all. Both cars come to a halt in the middle of the track. Senna is disqualified for a technical infraction in how he rejoined the track. Prost takes the title. Ayrton publicly accuses FIA President Jean-Marie Balestre of manipulating the championship. The statement is called unacceptable, and the driver is threatened with the loss of his license. 1 year later, the same Suzuka, the same scenario. Only this time, Prost is driving for Ferrari. Senna takes pole, but the front row position lands on the dirty side of the track, where dust builds up and grip is significantly worse. Ayrton demands they move pole to the clean racing line. The Federation refuses, the same biased leadership that had cost him the title a year earlier. And so Senna makes his decision. If Prost gets ahead at the start, he is not going to break into the first corner. With better grip, Prost pulls ahead. They approach the first corner at 270 kilometers per hour. Senna doesn't lift off the throttle. Only a year later would he admit it publicly. The crash was deliberate, a planned payback for the year before. The title that season was not secured by an engine. It was brought by a single decision made before the start. If the Federation plays dirty, he wouldn't play by the rules either. When the technological advantage of your rivals can no longer be beaten on the asphalt, the only way out is to change the rules themselves. At the end of 1992, the president of the FIA receives a Christmas card from Ayrton Senna, but instead of the usual holiday greetings, there is one specific request written inside: ban all electronic driver aids completely. Active suspension, traction control, anti-lock brakes. Active suspension at that point was practically driving the Williams cars by itself. A computer, dozens of times per second, adjusted the hydraulics to maintain a perfect ride height. The car literally floated over the asphalt where its rivals bounced. Williams had brought this system to a state of perfection. McLaren, Senna's own team, had not. The ban was indeed introduced for the 1994 season, but there was a catch. By that time, Senna himself had already signed a contract with Williams, with the team whose car was designed around technologies that would no longer exist. The new FW16 lost the computer that had been keeping it on the ground. Ayrton felt it in the very first tests. "I have a very negative feeling about driving this car on the limit," he admitted. "I haven't done a single lap where I've felt comfortable." Having lost stability and cornering speed, the teams had to look for the missing seconds on the straights. With no turbos and strict displacement limits, engineers were left with only one way to extract more power: spin the naturally aspirated engine even higher. But on this path, they hit a physical wall, the inertia of metal. In a classic engine, after a valve opens, it returns to its seat via a steel spring. But at extreme RPM, a phenomenon called valve float appears. Because of its own mass, the spring simply can't extend fast enough to close the valve in time. In high-compression race engines, the piston rises so high that it shares space with the valve. If the valve stays open even a millisecond too long, the piston strikes it head-on at brutal speed. Metal shatters metal, and the engine tears itself apart from the inside in a fraction of a second. To break through this barrier, engineers had to abandon springs altogether. The engineers at Renault replaced them with pneumatics, compressed nitrogen in a sealed circuit. Gas has almost no mass or inertia, so the valve began closing instantly, allowing them to raise the RPM ceiling to a level that had been unreachable before. Because of this, the Williams-Renault 510 was revving to 14 revolutions per minute. In that time, each of the 10 pistons travels from bottom dead center to top and back 238 times within a single second. And through all of this, the combustion chamber temperature holds steady at 2,500 degrees Celsius. The only thing keeping the engine from destroying itself, an oil film a few microns thick. Senna had pointed out the danger of the new regulations back during winter testing. The San Marino Grand Prix would become the weekend that confirmed the worst fears of the season, though not in any way anyone could have expected. 3 days of countdown. Friday, April the 29th. Rubens Barrichello, at 225 kilometers per hour, catches a curb at the Variante Bassa. His car is launched into the air and slammed into the barrier with 50 G of impact force. When Barrichello comes to at the medical center, the first thing he sees in front of him is Senna. To check on his friend, Ayrton had even ignored security and climbed over the fence. Saturday, April 30th. Roland Ratzenberger, at 314 kilometers per hour, loses his damaged wing. The car instantly loses all downforce and slams at a right angle into a concrete wall. Ratzenberger dies on the spot. That evening, Formula One's chief medical officer, neurosurgeon Sid Watkins, tells him, "Forget tomorrow's race. Forget all of it. You're already a 3-time world champion. You have nothing left to prove. Let's go fishing." Senna replies, "Sid, there are things over which we have no control. I cannot quit. I have to go on." The driver who consciously refused to brake before the first corner at Suzuka now turned out to be physically incapable of braking before the start at Imola. Different situations, the same single decision. Don't stop before the edge, whether it's the edge of the regulations or the edge of your own mortality. Before the race, Williams engineers made a modification to Senna's car. To give him more room in the cockpit, they cut the steering column and welded in a metal tube of smaller diameter, a weld seam on a component that constantly absorbs colossal vibration. Sunday, May 1st, lap 7 of the race. Senna's Williams enters the high-speed Tamburello corner, speed before the apex over 305 kilometers per hour. The car stops responding to the steering and continues straight ahead. Telemetry would later record braking and rapid downshifts, but changing the trajectory is no longer possible. The Italian prosecutor's office would spend years on technical and judicial investigations. The team's chief aerodynamicist, Adrian Newey, would be acquitted. But in 2007, the Italian Supreme Court would put the final word on it. The cause of the crash was metal fatigue on that same weld seam of the steering column. Williams' technical director, Patrick Head, would be found guilty of safety failures, but would escape sentencing only because the statute of limitations had expired. Officially, that engineering compromise made in the garage cost the life of a driver who was used to controlling every detail on the track. Michael Schumacher wins the Italian Grand Prix. It's his 41st victory, exactly the same number Ayrton Senna had won. At the press conference, a journalist asks what that number means to him.
Which puts you equal second all time with Ayrton Senna. Do those records mean a lot to you?
It does mean a lot to me.
Schumacher cannot finish the sentence. His voice breaks live in front of millions of viewers.
Can we have a break?
41 victories. Behind that number, for Ayrton Senna, there stood one single instinct: not to stop. At Suzuka, it brought him a title. At Imola, it took his life.